Hey everybody, 480 Sparky here. Seems to be a little confusion about the BR6 for reversing a lens on a Nikon camera. I'm going to do a little video here to kind of help explain what it does. But first, a little primer about macro photography and reversing lenses, especially with the Nikon modern G lenses. The way the Nikons control the aperture in their lenses is when you take a G lens off the camera body, you'll notice that it stops all the way down. It's completely closed. The only way to open it is to push this little tab that's on the side here that actuates the shutter open and close. That mates up with a small little lever here at the 9 o'clock position. If you look inside any Nikon DSLR, you'll see this little black tab. It may not show up here in the video. But that little tab, or that little arm, mates up with this. The problem is when you reverse a G lens, even though it's physically possible to do, you have absolutely no way of controlling the aperture. Yes, you can close it down all the way by not touching it, or you can open it up all the way. But the problem is, where is F8? You have absolutely no idea. Now, it is possible to reverse a G lens and use it for macro photography, but simply because you have absolutely no idea what aperture you're shooting at and it is not repeatable, this little tab only moves like 3/16 of an inch. That represents the entire range in this lens, anywhere from 3.5 to 22 or 4.5 to 32, depending on where it is in the zoom range. That's why G lenses aren't very conducive to shooting with a reverse lens. That's why I like to use a lot of the older version of the G lens, which is the D lens, because they have the old-fashioned aperture rings built onto them. And I can sit here and change that aperture ring to whatever aperture I want just by turning that ring. Now, when you use it on a modern DSLR, you want to dial it down to the minimum aperture, and Nikon gives you this handy-dandy little button here that allows you to keep from moving it, because if you change it out of that minimum aperture, your camera will lock up and refuse to fire. But when you reverse a lens, you want to be able to adjust that aperture to whatever aperture you want, because you need to do it because the camera can't, because the lens is reversed. Now, we're all familiar with reversing rings. I use a Nikon BR 2A simply because it's a nice fine machined piece of metal. It's solid, it's sturdy, it's not going to warp and bust and break just because I look at it wrong. And all you need is to make sure is the thread size of the reversing ring matches the thread size on your lens, and you simply turn it on, and then you can mount the lens backwards with the reverse of the lens face toward your subject. But again, you've got a problem here, is controlling that aperture. Now, you can, with a D lens, set the aperture to what you want, open it up, focus and compose, let go, take the photograph, and open it back up again. You can do this. But that's a little difficult when you're actually out in the field, especially if you're shooting handheld or even with a tripod. It gets a little bit clunky, and sometimes you end up putting your finger right on the back end of the back element of the lens. That's where the Nikon BR2 comes in, and it has a lot of features that I really like. And this is the Nikon BR2, or BR6, I'm sorry. This is the BR2. As you can see, it's the exact same lens mount as what's on the camera, and it does have a little tab here on the side that mimics what the same tab on the inside of the camera does, is it actuates the shutter, or the aperture. And all you need to do is line it up, and it just mounts onto there exactly like you would on a camera, and then you simply spin it around, and now you can mount the lens in reverse on your camera. Now, this allows you to do two things. You can set the aperture as you want, but it's held open until you press this lever down. Now you can take your photograph, let up, and your aperture opens back up to, in this case, f1.8. So you get that nice bright viewfinder. Now if you're doing a focus stack, or if you're shooting in with a tripod and you want to lock that aperture closed to whatever aperture you have set, simple. You simply push down and in, and it will stay there. So if you're doing a focus stack, now you can take your series of photographs, and then when you're done, simply pull it out, let go, and your aperture on your lens opens back up, and you got that nice bright viewfinder. That's one of the advantages of having this, is it keeps your fingers away if you're shooting handheld or with a tripod. It keeps your finger from fumbling with that little teeny tab. You've got a nice big lever out here. Plus you can also lock it down if you want to. It's that simple. Now for those of you who have been around since the film days, you might recognize this little silver tube. Cable release. I use this a lot. It does the exact same thing as the lever. And if you have a cable release that you can lock down, the same thing. You can let go of it, it will stay there, and when you're done, release it. There's one other advantage to the BR6 that I really like, and that is it's got a standard 52mm filter thread built into it. So you can take a 52mm filter or a lens cap, set it on there. So if you're shooting a lot of macros during the day, you don't have to worry about walking around with an exposed rear lens element. You can either put a UV filter or just buy a 52mm lens cap and you're set to go. So again, this is the Nikon BR2 or BR6. I keep getting the two confused because they're both BRs. Again, it has the manual lever here, cable release, and the 52mm thread. So this is 480 Sparky. Go forth and actuate.